My name is Sarah Osama, and I will be speaking about contradictions of postmodern city. So, what is postmodernism? In his book, The Language of Postmodern Architecture, Charles Jenks has identified the death of modernism as the destruction of the social housing designed by Le Corbusier. Individuals started to reject modernism and modernist views set forth by architects such as Le Corbusier. So, postmodernism was the new movement against modernism. Elizabeth W. Garber also described the darker side of modernism by writing a memoir about growing up in a glass house designed by her father, Woody Garber. Woody Garber was an architect who was described as one of the most experimental modern architects at that time. She described her childhood as growing up in isolation. Um, she felt like she was living in a museum because these glass facades were very transparent during the day and very reflective during the night. She said that rules of modernism governed her life. For example, Le Corbusier said no couches, so each of her and her family members had to sit in these isolated modern chairs, and she felt very away from her family. Like they were all an island away from each other, and they didn't have these common gathering spaces that childhood homes have. So she felt like she had this unusual childhood due to modernism. And during the 70s, there were these movements regarding the expression of people's opinions and views. They focused on communication and the generalization of art. The public opinions, the public opinion was the dominant opinion, and this created this popular culture or pop culture. So how does this all relate to the urban scale, the postmodern city? So postmodern cities are international, hybrid, they focus on services and knowledge and flagship developments. This creates contradictions, and these contradictions create seamless indifference, excitement and fear, pleasure and danger. We can see that this will all relate to globalization in the following case studies. So what is globalization? Globalization is signified by the spread of technology, the movement of individuals, and the generalization of the arts. So as we all know, technology has allowed for accelerated developments and sharing of information, but it also allowed for ignorance and replication. So individuals now receive information and just accept it. And they do not have this appreciation anymore for the amount of time it takes to gather information because information is just shared so quickly and spread so quickly. So the speed of comprehension is just minimal. And this has allowed the Western culture to spread more dominantly. This has created replicas and almost killed originality, and there's almost no originality in our contemporary times. As for the global movement, as we all know, individuals now can move between different nations, and this creates eclectic cities. But it also removes individuality because gentrification occurs in most cases, where the higher classes or richer individuals can dominate a local culture and completely overpower it. This creates segregation, hate, and discrimination, and allows Western culture to overpower these local communities in the name of hybridization. The generalization of the arts is shown as the rising of pop culture against modernism. This created common art, playful architecture, but it has not always appeared in the best of light. For example, we have Charles Moore's work, Piazza d'Italia in 1978, which was in the beginning of the movement. He generalized the mighty Roman architecture. He made it into this silly spectacle. He took fragments of this Roman architecture and displayed it in billboards and bits and pieces. He kind of created a silly demonstration from the glory of the Roman architecture. We can see here that he introduced fountains of his face sprouting water into this reflective pool that we can see here. And this kind of appeared as if he was spitting into this reflective pool. He also introduced these neon lightings in these Roman columns, and it just overall kind of depreciated and commercialized the Roman architecture. We can also see more recent examples, and this playful architecture still continues today, but there can also be positive examples that can be seen within this new movement towards playful architecture. So we have the Bjarke Ingels group that created this Lego house, which is a new and light-hearted type of architecture that kind of signifies hope, innocence, and is just targeted for family and children. And in here we can see that originality has been achieved. There was no replication or depreciation of any historical relevance. And thus we can see that play for architecture and generalization of the arts is not always negative, and can also be positive and refreshing. However, as we saw in Charles Moore's example, there can be cases of replication and ignorance. And there can also be, which we will see in the case studies in the following examples, that there are cities that kind of project these artistic, creative, and popular images, while they have these struggling segments of people within the same city. There is a lot of contrast between classes of people and the population in the city itself. We will see the following examples: Vancouver, Melbourne, and Dhaka. So Vancouver is a city in Canada that is in a network of commerce and telecommunications. It is described as a progressive and richly differentiated culture. However, due to these same reasons, it can create replicas, and it has a crisis of national identity. So, as we all know, Canada has a large movement of people and influx of ethnicities that creates diversity and a transcultural entity. It is kind of considered as a haven for immigrants. However, within this transcultural entity, these differences are muted. There's a lot of fragmentation. Individuals move into this country, move into this city, and there are no signified neighborhoods with common cultures. People cannot replicate or recreate their local cultures within this new country. Instead, they just live alongside each other and only express their differences during celebrations or events of tragedy. There is also a lack of job for incoming immigrants. Immigrants of the older generation are stuck in dead-end jobs and small businesses. There are a lot of barriers to actually work in white-collar or professional employment, and they only hope that their children, the second generation, can go into these white-collar or professional businesses. We also have Melbourne, a city in Australia, that aimed for international recognition. The city tried to achieve that with events such as the Grand Prix established in the 90s. However, this movement towards increasing tourism, employment, and business was hiding a lot of destroyed opposition and closed offices. There was an illusion of democracy that was actually hiding a lot of struggle between groups of people that were against these international projects, and they were silenced, and the projects were moved forward. Another issue was the labor forces. So labor forces, since the city was moving more into the service industry, has forced the older generation into retirement or dead-end jobs. And the upcoming generation is just instantly directed to the service industry, since the city is moving into this tertiary sector to service and cater to these international developments. As for the city of Dhaka, as we know, Louis Khan and other architects have created world-renowned buildings in these cities. And this same city that has this glorified architecture actually hides the struggle of the homeless people, the lower classes that are still dying of accidents and disasters, while there's a lot of money wasted on events and frivolous objects in other parts of the same city. And this is all showing a struggle between these classes. This There is another issue, which is the illusion of progression that the individuals are projecting by using electronic banking and purchasing in large stores. So people are ready to spend their most to buy happiness. People who do not actually cannot actually afford to purchase things in large stores or using these electronic banking options, use them to just project the illusion that they can keep up with the rest of the city. Another issue is the ignorance and replication of the Western culture. So the youth of Dhaka, along with the youth in multiple cities, are replicating the Western culture without actually knowing and appreciating the history or the background behind such events. So, for example, they celebrate Valentine's Day or International Mother Language Day without actually knowing what is behind these specific holidays and these specific occasions. The replication of these cultures is crushing knowledge and individuality. And this is just a sad contradiction that is seen due to globalization and overpowering of Western culture. I applied these contradictions to the city of Amman. As we all know, Amman is moving to the service industry. There is a lot of influx of monetary support due to international aid and NGOs, since we have an influx of immigrants. And these immigrants are occupying the primary and secondary sectors, while the local population is moving more and more to the service industry. There's a lot of development of flagship projects as well. So we have this large urban project that actually displaced a local market and rural area. And we have this large transportation project that is disturbing the day-to-day life as it is being applied. Um, the issue of immigrants also is supposed to create this diversity and unity within the cultures of Jordan and the surrounding countries. However, it is creating segregation, hate, racism, and fragmentation. The local people are rejecting these incoming immigrants because they believe they are taking their jobs, and they are at odds with these people, even though they share the same culture and the same language. And these immigrants are faced with high costs and stricter regulations. The final issue that can also be related to Amman is the technological advancements. So there's a lot of banking, payments, governmental applications, deliveries, credit and debit cards that signify these technological advancements that show that individuals are paying, but they actually are paying more than they own, more than they have. So all of these aspects actually project this progression of the city, and yet they are hiding the difficulty of day-to-day life in the middle and lower classes. So looking at all of these case studies, I began reflecting on what the future holds for all of these, for the world and all of these cities. So will individuality and other cultures disappear? Will the Western culture overpower all of them? Or, for example, will a new culture, perhaps Eastern culture, rise against the Western culture? Will Amman be the next postmodern city, since it is now becoming a haven for these neighboring Middle Eastern countries that are in conflict? Will future postmodern cities have these same contradictions that are seen in the previous case studies? Will the issues be actually solved in modern or upcoming future postmodern cities and create a true progress for the entire population and all of their citizens? Well, these questions will probably be answered in the future. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.